vibe going, man. You just gonna set it up. I was just waiting for those horns. Should be coming soon, right? What you feeling down for? No, I like that. Just vibing right now. Don't be sad. The sun is shining. The angels are dancing in heaven. You hear me?
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. Listen, Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. It's another Sunday afternoon, her 4 till 6 o'clock show, the Afrocentricity Book Show. My name is Brother Jegna. It's really great to have you guys here with me again.
Man and a homeless lady.
Today we will be continuing a reading of the great book called The Irritated Genie, Essays on the Haitian Revolution.
Wake up the people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up.
The book was written by the great scholar who's passed away now. He's an ancestor, Dr. Jacob H. Carruthers. The Irritated Genie, an essay on the Haitian Revolution by Jacob Hay Carruthers. Okay, so I hope everybody had a great week. Many things have been happening this week, as usual, you know, in our communities, on the TV, you name it. Please don't forget to call in. The studio number is 07944 431 366. That is 07944 431 366. Please phone in for any of your comments to do with the show, the Haitian Revolution. I believe it's a era of our history we must grasp, we must understand, we must recognize the full importance of it to us today. The Haitian Revolution, for you who do not know really, on the 1st of January 1884, the Haitian Revolution ended and came to fruition with the nation being coming independent. A new nation called Haiti. It was called, before that it was called Santo Domingo, Saint Dominique in French, yeah. The Haitian nation, under the auspices of the great general Jean-Jacques Dessalines. He became the emperor, and it's really a thing we need to understand. So, importance of it very quickly is that he shows you what unity can do, because the former enslaved of this colony, it was a French colony, the richest colony in the world. These Africans rose up, using their own culture, their own image of God, unity. They beat the superpowers of the day. Who were the superpowers? They beat the French on the island. They beat Napoleon's army, who he sent there. They beat the British. They beat the Spanish. They played them off against each other and beat them all. Remember, they were the superpowers of the day, to launch the new nation called Haiti. We spell it with a H normally, but people, the Africans who live in the island, spell Haiti with an A. A-Y-A-T-A-I. Yeah, Haiti, we're beginning with an A, the Haitian Revolution. So we're going to continue where we left off from last week. We're still finishing off chapter 6. We will continue with that. And I think you were aware of the main players in this. On the island, there's obviously the Africans. There's obviously the French Europeans as well. But there's also, excuse me, within the white population, they got somebody called the Greater Whites and the Smaller Whites. The Great Whites were the landowners, the extremely wealthy. The Smaller Whites are really like the shopkeepers, the administrators, people like that, the lower things. They kind of hated each other. However, they would unite to fight, obviously, the Africans. Between the Africans, who was the enslaved, there was over 500,000 of them there, and the Europeans. There was also what they call the mulattoes. It's not a nice term, mulatto, because if you check the word mulatto, it's what we would call today mixed race. Mulatto kind of means like half donkey. So it's not really a nice, not really a nice term, really, okay? But the mulatto was obviously the offspring of the European colonizers, the enslavers, the planters, and the African enslaved formed another class. So many of these mulatto were wealthy because their father were noblemen and the rich. Many of them went to France to get their education, and they came back. They were landowners, and they had a bit of authority. However, because they had African blood in their veins, they were denied the full rights of the whites, whether it's the poor whites or the rich whites. They were denied those kind of entitlements. Yeah. So when the Haitian Revolution kind of broke out, there was really three main protagonists within the Haitian or the Santo Domingo society. There was the whites, there was the Africans that were enslaved, and there was the mulattoes who formed another group. Obviously, the Europeans played off the mulatto against the Africans because mulattoes, in some certain sense, hated some of the Africans because they believed that they was denied their full rights because of their African blood they had in their veins. So, they paid them off. But having said that, though, because of the African blood, they were closer to the Africans, the enslaved. And that's why the Europeans always denied them their full rights, because they believed any time that war might break out or any sort of uprising will take place, the mulattoes will join the Africans. And that is essentially what happened in the end, okay? So let me remind you that this show, the Afrocentric The Book Show, every Sunday 4 till 6, is sponsored by our local business, our great local business called Glass R Us. You can get to Glass R Us. They are based on 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15, 5NH. Glass R Us, you can get them on 0208 800 6663. So please make sure you get a pen. I'll be reading out these numbers later on. 0208 800 6663. So why do we want to go to Glass R Us? Glass R Us, go to them for all your glazing needs. Glass repairs, double glazing, shelving, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, shower cubicles, you name it, they will be able to sort you out. If you mention this show, you'll get a nice 10% discount. Remember, I just mentioned the Afrocentricity Book Show, and you will get a 10% discount. Excuse me, I'm battling a bit of a cold here. So the reason why you should go to Glass R Us because they are fully transparent. And you get a nice 10% discount. And any of your glazing needs, please check them out, yeah? Their phone number again is Glass R Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road, is 0208 800 6663. So I'm going to continue reading The Irritated Genie. So the idea of the genie is that when Jean-Jacques Dessalines, on the 1st of January 1804, he made a speech on their independence speech when they was forming a nation, and he spoke of a genie which kind of lived in the sea. He was the genie of justice. And he says that any time Europeans try to attack the island again, the genie would arise. And really is the spirit of the Africans, yeah? The genie would arise and fight off anybody who tried to enslave the island again. So on near the end of chapter 6, page 62, so I'm going to continue, yeah? Please don't forget to phone in. The phone number for the studio is 07944 431 366. So I'm going to continue reading The Irritated Genie by the great author, Jacob H. Carruthers. So, Dessalines. Dessalines, the return to the genie. So, Dessalines' relative obscurity until 1794 and his rapid rise thereafter to the second in command to Toussaint himself is significant. He apparently started as a guide for Toussaint in 1794. So Toussaint Louverture, he was the key general when they was fighting the Spanish and the British and the French. When the war, you could say, uprising actually broke out, many of the Spanish, my apologies, many of the French sent to the British in Jamaica, and they sent certain troops to go and help them, but they didn't really do anything much, yeah? But later on now, Dessalines rose to become a great general, and after Dessalines, so my apologies, after Toussaint was taken away by the French to Napoleon, and he was locked into a dungeon in France, Dessalines really took control with the other generals. So Dessalines' relative obscurity until 1794 and his rapid rise thereafter to second in command to Toussaint himself is significant. He apparently started as a guide for Toussaint in 1794. By 1796, he was singled out for praise by Toussaint and was entrusted always with the most vital assignments. It can be inferred from his subsequent words and deeds that he almost joined the group which openly and defiantly adhered to the philosophy of Bookman. So if I interject, Bookman was the voodoo priest who really held a meeting which triggered the Haitian Revolution. He held a small group of people. He held a ceremony. It was called by the female priestess called Fatima. Fatima, she was a mambo, which is a voodoo priest, and Bookman, between Bookman and Cecile Fatima, they called the meeting which led to the Haitian Revolution. So Bookman were called Toussaint's nephews, or my apologies, Moise and Belair were called Toussaint's nephews and expected to in turn to be his choice for succeeding him, who were less clearly identified with his ancient tradition. His vigour, his Dessalines, his vigour doubtlessly increased when Toussaint moved away from Francois and Bissau and closer to the idea of total liberation of blacks. But where Toussaint's ideal of liberty was desperately or inseparably linked to equality, Dessalines was inseparably linked to independence. By 1800, when it appeared that Toussaint and his philosophy was succeeding, Dessalines, who was committed to a philosophy more attuned to the reality of the situation, became confiding this reality to his soldiers. He told them at a very early date that the French would try to re-establish slavery and that blacks would win the ensuing war. Thus, when the French expedition arrived to put the blacks in their place, Toussaint and Dessalines followed different plans, although their interests converged to some extent for quite a few months. So Toussaint wanted to put forth an awesome show of resolution and force to convince the French that they had to reach terms acceptable to the blacks. Dessalines, on the other hand, simply wanted to destroy the French completely. At Dessalines' insistence, they agreed that the correct strategy was to burn all the cities and to raise the masses of field workers. If the French landed, Dessalines went even further and instructed his men to leave no white person standing. Since Toussaint still held a formal leadership and the loyalty of most of the blacks and mulatto generals, his approach at first prevailed. Indeed, most of the members of the elite believed that Toussaint's ideal of a black-ruled French colony. They also had a vested interest in such an order since they had acquired wealth and built expensive homes in the cities and retreats in the countries. And this is particularly the mulattoes. In January 1802, when Toussaint saw the French ships stretching across the horizon, he knew that in their heart, that doomsday for the dream, his doomsday dream was at hand. Yet he had no choice but to play the hand to the end. He wanted to exhaust all possibilities of working out an acceptable compromise with the French before opening a full-scale defense. So let me say that Toussaint, eventually, when he had control of the whole island, what he wanted to do was keep Haiti, Santo Domingo as it was called previously, as a colony of the French, and he would rule it for the French. And Dessalines and many of the others said, well, wait a minute, you still want to keep these former enslaved working on the fields for the French, earn money for the French? Dessalines said no. He said the French need to leave here. It'll be our island. But Dessalines, even though he was a brilliant general, he was a brilliant political strategist as well, he still wanted to rule it because he maybe loved French so much because of his upbringing. He still wanted to rule the island for the French. So Toussaint wanted to wait until the last minute before, as I said, the issue to burn all the cities. Christophe, another general, however, had been ordered to feel out the commander-in-chief of the French military expedition before beginning their strategy. When it became apparent that the French under Leclerc is Napoleon's brother-in-law, who was married to Napoleon's wife, Leclerc would not negotiate. When it became apparent that the French leader under Leclerc would not negotiate, Christophe burned Cape Francois, one of the major cities. Only then did Toussaint send a message to all the other commanders of the coastal cities. But the messages were either too late or the commanders were too intimidated by the French authority. Because the French sent something like 80-odd ships. They was really coming to take back the island, yeah? But the messages are received too late. So in the middle of February, most of the coastal cities, the French issued an invitation to the black commanders to submit to French authority and retain their rank. Most simply accepted the invitation in the absence of any other instructions. From Dessalines' standpoint, this was a setback. He would have immediately burned the cities, which could not be defended. Instead, within a few weeks after the invasion of the French, most of the French army under Leclerc, Dessalines would have immediately given orders for all the generals to defend against the French invasion. Only Toussaint, Dessalines and Christophe, among the top commanders, refused to submit to Leclerc's orders, to basically submit and I'll keep your rank. Obviously, you could not trust these people. After Christophe's defiance at Cape Francois, Leclerc, upon landing, appealed to Toussaint to submit to French rule through his sons, who had been sent back to the island for that purpose. When Toussaint refused, Leclerc outlawed Toussaint and Christophe. The two obvious reasons were, number one, Christophe, under Toussaint's orders, had personally defied Leclerc when he burnt down Cape Francois. And two, that exacting pressure on the two most francophile among the top leaders who produced results. One writer argued that Leclerc had more hopes of winning Dessalines over. That is why he was not outlawed. But the fact that Napoleon, in his instructions to Leclerc, specifically singled out Dessalines and not Christophe, along with Mosey and Toussaint as the most dreaded blacks, debunked the idea. In fact, Napoleon had directed Leclerc to make every attempt to win over Christophe and the others because they were viewed as being more pro-French. So thus the three black generals, all former enslaved, battled against the finest of France. And while France won over a large part of Toussaint's army, The resisting generals had the masses. In a rapid series of brilliant battles, Toussaint and Christophe achieved their objective by impressing upon the French the necessity of coming to terms. Dessalines moved towards an objective by organizing the core of the massive resistance. Christophe performed well, keeping his army intact, although he was overwhelmed in several skirmishes. Toussaint fought Rochambeau, Leclerc's second-in-command, to a standstill, and Dessalines defended Saint-Marc, the only major city that did not initially fall into French hands. Dessalines and his burn and fly tactics, moving across the unknown mountain range, so demoralized the French that Dessalines' name paralyzed the military mind and the top French generals. So another heading here is called Crête à Perros in legend and fact. So if I give you a little background, Crête à Perros was a fort which the Africans had beaten the French and got hold of the fort. And the fort was a major tactical point which everybody wanted. And eventually the French tried to take it back. He had his new troops. From Napoleon's troops tried to take it back. So it was a great battle there. So let me read what the book says. So, no event characterized the irritated genie, the spirit of the Black Revolution, more than the Battle of Crête à Perros, which is at the office of which at once the most outstanding battle of the Haitian Revolution, and a legend in the historical memory of the Haitian people. This battle proved that the earlier battles had indicated that the blacks could move whenever and wherever they chose. The battle was cemented the hardcore revolutionary and demoralized the French army. I'll just remind you that Napoleon's troops had beaten every single army in Europe and Asia. These people are unbeatable. And that's why Napoleon, who wanted the Santo Domingo back under French control, because it was the richest island in the world, bigger than all the British colonies put together. He sent the best armies there. They thought that these are the best troops in the world. They could definitely win, okay? But they made a sad mistake when they came across these Africans who readopted their own culture and the old image of God and united. So Crête à Perros was a fort situated at the top of a 300-foot hill and was well fortified and surrounded by a ditch. The fort was an arsenal for the Black Army, but all the stored ammunition had been secretly removed before the siege. The battle plan was designed to lure as much of the French army to the Crête as possible, while the remainder of the Black Army moved into strategic positions and re-established black military supremacy. Dessalines and his men had the assignment of acting as a decoy by manning and maintaining the Crête. This is the fort. This would allow the armies of Toussaint and Christophe to surround the besieged French troops and besiege the French troops. The French would then hack up as they deployed after the siege. Dessalines set up the defense of the fort by manning it with the bravest commanders and troops, placing several posts outside the fort to check the enemy's movements. The French, thinking they would destroy the morale of the Black Army by terrorizing the countryside, had started murdering entire villages of blacks. The French also thought that they would capture the bulk of the armaments that the blacks by taking the fort. As we saw, they took many of their armors out. Of course, the blacks knew the French would be tempted by this prospect and that they would be unable to see the trick. In order to lure the French into the trap, so Dessalines himself left the fort and got the attention of one of the major contingents of the enemy army, and cleverly led a pursuit of easy prey until the blacks suddenly disappeared into the ditches surrounding the fort. And then the fire from the wall on the fort cut the French troops to pieces. This was repeated several times with the same effect. The tactics were based upon the methods that the African rebels had been using for 200 years. This time, 12,000 of the 18,000 men French army were involved in the siege. So there was 12,000 French troops on the siege. Completely surrounded Crete, the fort. From the French standpoint, it was a perfect trap. The 2,000 blacks inside would eventually either be blown away by the cannons, or the back cannon shots lobbed into the fort, or they would starve to death. Because what the French did, they managed to get to a higher peak, and they lobbed cannonballs into the fort at will. So when Dessalines returned to the fort after luring several hundred French into the line of fire, the assembled blacks consisted not only of his army, but also women and children. He proclaimed to them, and this is what the Dessalines' speech to the Africans in the fort: "I want only the brave men with me. We are going to be attacked. Let those who want to revert to slaves of the French leave the fort. Who would rally themselves around me and wish to die free men?" So he's basically saying it's either freedom or death. If you want to leave, go now to the French. But if you want to stay and fight for freedom, be willing to die, because we're going to fight to the death. The answer shouted by the brave black people was, "We will all die for liberty." Dessalines then told them that if and when the French entered, he would blow up the fort. So there's obviously a lot of dynamite there. If they entered the fort, he would blow it up. Dessalines and his army were at their best at this point, taking advantage of the arrogance of the collective psyche of the French. He goaded them again and again, rushing into the fort, and each time losing hundreds of men. More significantly, the blacks had killed one French general and wounded 4 others, including Leclerc himself. They also withstood the severest assault of the French firepower as it poured in the mulattoes under the command of Alexander Pétion. So let me read that again. He wounded several of the French soldiers, including Leclerc himself, who was a leader, Napoleon's brother-in-law. They also had withstood several assaults of the French firepower poured in by the mulattoes under French command of Alexander Pétion. So even mulattoes had gone back with the French and were attacking the African fort, African-held fort. After inflicting those terrible losses and leaving behind 600 brave defenders of the fort, Dessalines, at the head of his army, dashed through the deadly French circle with minimum losses. He outflanked them and gave sufficient harassment so that the men still at the fort were able to slip through the lines to safety. All told, the French had lost 20% of their 12,000 troops. Many of them officers. In the meantime, Toussaint was able to strategically locate his army throughout the country during a month of the siege. Thus, the French won from a technical standpoint in that they got the fort back. But what it was, they attacked the French during the night, and because if they stayed in the fort, they would have just all been killed. So during the night, Toussaint sneaked back into the fort, and they fought their way out through the 12,000 French troops to safety. It was kind of an amazing feat, because it looked like it was surely they was going to die. So after this battle, any time that they fell down, they will cry, "Lacrete," Pierre Lacrete, because they all said we could beat anybody just in that battle. So it was a battle cry anytime they felt a bit low. This battle also demonstrated Dessalines' philosophy vis-a-vis Toussaint. Papa Toussaint had started with the idea of giving Carita parole as a law which would enable him to win a significant battle. He insisted that he needed to win a battle. Dessalines' reply was that the French could count all the battles. All he wanted to do was to count the dead Frenchmen. Thus the French had the battle, but Dessalines had his 2,000 dead Frenchmen. From the standpoint of this essay, as well as the future of the struggle, the orientation of Dessalines gave his troops, as they were in the Crete, was now significant. Dessalines knew that Toussaint was merely making a show of force as a prelude to coming to terms with the French. Toussaint had indicated as much in his conversations with Dessalines. He also knew that he would then abandon practically all of the trained black soldiers except for his own troops. But he knew that the masses of blacks who had been in the rebellion against Toussaint would continue to fight on for the liberty or death. So Dessalines, I think he's saying here, is that Dessalines really wanted to win that battle so he could negotiate with the French. But Dessalines wanted to win the battle to count dead Frenchmen, to get them off the island. He used to say to him, we've got nothing to negotiate with the French. The only thing we need to go negotiate with the French was what time they're leaving the island. But Toussaint wanted to negotiate with them because he wanted to run the island for the French still. So, they were still inspired by the irritated genie. Remember, the irritated genie is the African's spirit of revolution for freedom. At these points, Dessalines demonstrated that he had completely identified with the ancient black liberation ethos, conquer or die. Face to face with the army, he proclaimed, so this is the words of Dessalines again, "Do not be discouraged, I say to you. Do not be discouraged. The French will not be able to remain for a long time in Saint-Dominique. But soon they will fall ill and die like flies. Pay close attention. If Dessalines surrenders to them 100 times, he will betray them 100 times. I repeat to you, do not be discouraged. And you will see when the numbers of the French will be few. We will upset them. We will beat them. We will burn their crops. Then we will await in the hills. They will not be able to keep the country, and they will be forced to leave it. Then I will render you independent. There will be no more whites among us." And that's the words of Dessalines. Because what is small fever? Like during the rainy season, Europeans would start to die like flies of the flu. Yeah, so all they had to do is keep on fighting them, and eventually nature would take care of the rest of them. From time to time on, the masses in the army sang while marching to the combat. And this will be the song. "Brave Dessalines, God alone leads you." The song was composed by a free man of color who had been a teacher before the revolution had begun. The divergent goals of Dessalines and Toussaint were clearly apparent at this point. Dessalines had translated the ancient black formula into liberty, independence, or death. He had clarified the problem of who the enemy was. The enemy was the white man, rather than those against the rebellion in France, those against Republican France. It was then apparent to all that though they were still allies, Dessalines and Toussaint were fighting different wars. As Toussaint's strategy wound down, it became less and less legitimate to the blacks. But he was destined to dance with the phantom to the bitter end. So the end of Toussaint's struggle, Toussaint was tricked. Toussaint, who had tried to avoid the war in the first place, knew that his ideal of liberty, equality, and prosperity would not prevail unless the hostilities were ended. He was now ready to negotiate from a position of strength. He communicated secretly with the French that he was still loyal to the Republic, i.e. to France, and conveyed the notion that the war had resulted from a misunderstanding caused by the ineptness of the command of the French expedition. He secretly authorized Christophe to negotiate with the French High Command. Toussaint agreed to submit to French authority provided that the French would grant amnesty to all the black generals and incorporate his black army units with full rank into the French army. He also demanded that the French officials reaffirm the abolition of slavery with liberty and equality for all regardless of colour. After a series of exchanges, Leclerc granted the proper assurances, provided that Toussaint retire to private life. Toussaint agreed, and he and Christophe submitted themselves to Leclerc's restoration of the new order, this time with a white governor. Let me say to you, one of the words that Napoleon said to Leclerc was, agree to anything they want, and then you can seize them. So as for Dessalines, let us hear from Captain Rainsford, the English seaman who was on duty in the West Indies during the times, who followed with clear and accurate observations the affairs of Saint-Dominique. And this is the words of the British captain, Captain Rainsford. He says, the brave Dessalines, the brave Dessalines alone remained without joining in the Treaty of Peace. He saw an unnatural amnesty projected, and he knew there were yet armies ready in the field when called into defence of their freedom. Yet he would not thwart the wish of his brethren, and therefore coincided with the acts of the General-in-Chief, that's Toussaint. As such, he must be acquitted of suffering any imposition by the professions of the French general, for he believed none of them and is not responsible for any sincerity by his accordance with the peace, when he knew the blacks would not regard the dereliction of their leaders. These conclusions were written in 1805, when Dessalines was still alive and present, and rather widely known, which was a widely known stance of Dessalines. In fact, Dessalines, after hearing of the submissions of Toussaint, exclaimed that there was nothing to negotiate but the complete evacuation of the French army. This demonstrates that Dessalines was not faithful to his pledge at Crete Perot, but that he knew that the Black Revolution would continue without the army of Toussaint. The irritated genie of Haiti had triumphed over the Phantom. Indeed, the rebellion had started against Toussaint before the blacks realized that the French were coming to re-enslave them. Therefore, when Dessalines and Christophe were given the task of pacifying the recalcitrant rebels, Dessalines began his role of betraying the French 100 times. In the meantime, Leclerc, in true European arrogance and stupidity, decided to get rid of what he considered the two greatest threats. First, he deported Rigaud, a mulatto leader, who had been held in reserve and not allowed into the fight. And then he had Toussaint kidnapped and deported. The simplicity of the French trap reveals that the fact that Toussaint was still hypnotized by the phantom of liberty. He was invited to dinner by one of the French generals. And when he arrived, he was quickly and efficiently surrounded by French troops and taken aboard a ship with his family and sent to France. He was later starved to death in a French prison in the middle of France, in the freezing cold, I must add. Thus Leclerc had gotten rid of the two upstarts who he had dared to try ruling a possession of the French nation. He thought evidently that with their respective leaders gone, the remainder of the blacks and mulatto troops would meekly submit to their own undoing. While that in itself was not completely irrational, her conclusion, certainly he should have known that the rebelling masses, with the hundreds of intimate and local leaders, would not abandon their struggle, as they had not done for 300 years. Toussaint's revolutionary program thus ended in a defiant and humiliation, not because he was a coward. On the contrary, he was a very brave man. Rather, his philosophy was founded on a fantasy that whites would accept blacks as equals. I hope you're listening to this. Let us recall that it was Dessalines who recognized this illusion as the phantom of liberty, which France espoused to their eyes. Not only was Toussaint abandoned by the masses of blacks who were fighting against him, and even before the French returned, but most of his own top lieutenants abandoned him. Dessalines later reflected on his defection from Toussaint. Somewhat unlike him, who has preceded me, the ex-general Toussaint Louverture, I have been faithful to the promise I have made to you. According to Dessalines, Toussaint had been conquered by the French armies. Oh, my apologies, not by the French armies, but by the eloquence of the proclamation of their agents. Toussaint had ultimately believed in the humanity of the French nation. He had wanted the blacks to be like them, but he died with this unfulfilled fantasy. The final blow to Toussaint's dream was the order restoring slavery to the West Indies, decreed by Napoleon a few weeks after Toussaint's imprisonment. Thus, Saint Dominique had come a full circle, except that the masses of the blacks had finally learned a lesson about how to win. So let me remind you that this is the Afrocentricity Book Show. We are reading the great book called The Irritated Genie by the author Jacob H. Carruthers. The Irritated Genie is an essay on the Haitian Revolution. This show is sponsored by Glass Are Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. Go to Glass Are Us for all your glazing needs, because Glass Are Us are completely transparent, so you know you can trust them. So the collapse, another heading here, the collapse of the French expedition. Ironically, at the time Leclerc had apparently accomplished his mission, the reality was totally different. The view that he stated in his communications to his superiors in France was indeed one of success. In only 5 months, he had received the submission of all the black generals, including Toussaint. He had employed Dessalines and Christophe to suppress unorganized remnants of the rebelling blacks. Thus, according to his reports, the final task, the complete restoration of slavery, was simply a matter of correct timing. The only problem he worried about was that yellow fever had reached epidemic proportions and that he needed more reinforcements. Leclerc promised Napoleon that the mop-up of the African troops would resume in the fall when the disease would abate with the return of more favorable climate. How wrong he was. So while the plague had been explained as the major result of the defeat of the French, the most blatant statement in this regard is La Trope Stoddard, the French in his book *The French Revolution in Saint Domingue*. Its advent was not exactly fortuitous. In March, at Crete-Perot, that fort, Dessalines, in his speech to his men, said, "Soon they will fall and die like flies." Earlier, Toussaint had communicated the same prediction to Dessalines. Thus, the fever included is the strategy of the blacks. So while the blacks may not have caused the fever, as in the case of the planned biological warfare which the Europeans always practiced, they took advantage of nature's vengeance against those European tyrants and aggravated the condition of their life to such an extent that the French were holed up in half-burned out cities with polluted water, insufficient medical supplies and hospitals, and with low morale and depression. And these conditions ensured that the French would be hit by the plague with maximum fatalities. So as Europeans, when they went to the USA, they gave small blankets kind of with smallpox on them to the natives, the indigenous American people, like the Sioux and the Apache, people like that. They used germ warfare against these people. But what they did in Haiti, they let nature take care of it. The smallpox was a natural disease which the European did not have a great defense for. So they fought, during the favourable weather, the African fought, burnt the cities, fought the European troops to a standstill, and then when the rains came and the smallpox fever hit them, they just wait for nature to do its thing. The fact of awesome fatalities from the battlefield and the fever made the clerk totally dependent on the black soldiers who he had apparently submitted to his authority. From his blind perspective, his most useful officers in this regard were Dessalines and Christophe. So he believed that Dessalines and Christophe, who actually went over to Leclerc when he invaded the island, he thought they were still on his side, but he didn't realise that they were playing him off. Yeah. So therefore, he could not deport them immediately because he believed that they was on his side. Yeah, Christophe and Dessalines. He needed them to keep the black rebels in check. In a final act of frustration, de Klerk decided to use Dessalines to disarm the black soldiers. But as Stewart said, the writer, nothing could have been more perilous unless it was not to disarm them. The French command was, however, not entirely responsible for their misinformation because they were confined virtually to these cities and had to depend on their black informants for intelligence. Thus, the French command knew less than the English and the Americans about the reality of the country. Let us listen to the reality as understood by the British naval officer who was stationed in the Caribbean at the time. So this is a report from the British. It was therefore soon known that everybody but the French High Command that Christophe had rejoined the black forces with Dessalines, who could never be considered as having defected. They began by affecting in their different characters of command and to retreat from those who were hostile, taking care always to leave behind them considerable quantities of ammunition and stores. So raids were continued. A number of new generals likewise had arisen in arms from the interior of the island, who began to make excursions from the mountains. Among these were the powerful chiefs of the Congo tribe called the Sansui. So we must remember that all during the 300 years that the French ruled this island, Africans always fled to the mountains. They escaped They burnt the crops, killed some of the planters, and fled to the mountains. And they created like African free villages, communities up in the mountains and the hills, where, because really the French or the Europeans really lived on the coast. They didn't really live on the hinterland at all, with the mountainous lands at all. And these Africans always came down, if you remember from last week, excuse me, to burn the plantations down and harass the locals. And eventually, because they worked out a lot of tactics of how to harass these Europeans, they came down from the mountains to join in the revolution against all these European forces which attacked the island to re-enslave the island. So here's how a black soldier, Bosron Tonnerre, Brosmond Tonnerre, who became Dessalines' secretary, to describe Dessalines' deception of Leclerc. So this is the view from the black intelligence. Leclerc flattered Dessalines and loaded him with promises, to which he pretended to conduct his conduct entitled. He assaulted him. Oh, my apologies. He assured him that he might count on him, the special favour of the government, and that of First Consul after the advantageous reports he had made on his behalf. Would not he be slow in bestowing upon him such a reward worthy of him? So he flattered Dessalines and said, "Oh, don't worry, all the reports you've given to me, I'll give you a high position." In a word, he employed all those political common places by which the whites, and above all the French, hoped to guile the blacks and mulattoes. Dessalines saw with what sort of man he had to deal, and he was consequently on his guard. After thanking the Captain General, he begged him to believe that his most anxious wish was to retire his whole family back to France, and that as for the rest, he placed every reliance on the good intentions of the government, to which he was entirely devoted. "You are too necessary here," replied Leclerc. "You must not embark to France till I accompany you, which will not be soon, in less than 6 months. Allow me the pleasure of presenting to you the First Consul. You know that he is my brother-in-law." So he's saying to Dessalines, I'm going to present you to my brother-in-law, Napoleon. "It is a long time to wait unanswered, Dessalines. Nevertheless, I submit to your wishes." So whether Leclerc was really the dupe of Dessalines, or whether he thought of him too dull to perceive the trap that he had laid for him, he began to insinuate that up to that period he had been unable to discover who were really hostile to the French government, but he hoped that his assistance to learn who they were, with whom he ought to combat in order to restore peace and harmony. As to the planters, they were so unfortunate and possess so little influence that it cannot be supposed that they have any interest in continuing the troubles. They have their families and properties in France. It is not rather that the men of colour that we owe all our misfortunes. Dessalines felt all the consequences of his reply and framed it in accordance to the views of the Captain General. Dessalines said, "Since we are of the same opinion," said the latter, "I think that our only plan will be to exterminate the whole of them. But I am embarrassed in the choice of means. The French troops are reduced to disease, that hardly enough remain to garrison the towns. I think you ought to levy an army of 5,000 men for this expedition, which we need to continue longer than you find expedient. Wait," he added, "I will give you an order to receive whatever arms and ammunition you require. In fact, he wrote the order with his own hands and sent it to General Dessalines, along with 500 double guns, or double Louis, the money for the expenses of the expedition, acquainting him that he might set foot or set off as soon as he thought fit. So Dessalines duped him to give him money and arming him with lots of money and arms and stuff like that, and Dessalines tricked the clerk and just used those arms and money against the French in the end. What it was, the French was just so arrogant that these people are the Africans, they can't outsmart us, but all the time they were being outsmarted because they was in the coast and they didn't have intelligence what was happening into Ireland or in the middle of the island. So they relied on the Africans for this intelligence, and the intelligence was forced because they was just using it to get rid of the French. Dessalines was indeed fulfilling his promise. He was deceiving the clerk 100 times, making the arrogant French think he was the most trusted Uncle Tom, while he was arming and organizing the armies who had taken refuge in the hills. Additionally, he had forced other black officers who had truly submitted to the French to defect from their terminally ill French masters and rejoin the revolution. Whether Dessalines was actually a conspirator in getting rid of Toussaint is a matter of conjecture. Certainly, he did not shed any tears over the fate of his former leader, over the former leadership of the mulattoes had fallen, who was beginning to see what was in store for them after the deportation of Rigaud. So Rigaud was a mulatto general, and they saw a lot of mulattoes were over to the French side. So when they saw how they treated one of the mulatto leaders, it was easy to get mulattoes back onto the African side again, to start the revolution again, or to strengthen the revolution. So while the French army in Saint-Domingue viewed itself as a victorious vindicator of the white race, in reality they were the dying remnants of a thoroughly humiliated group of clumsy but still deadly fools. In October, Leclerc himself died, and his body was shipped back to France. His death was symbolic of the condition of the French army, which is a walking corpse. So this is the Afrocentricity Book Show. We're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back. We're going to continue reading The Irritated Genie by Jacob Carruthers. We're going to start Chapter 7 in a few moments, which is entitled The Blacks versus the Whites. Remember, this is the Afrocentricity Book Show. It is every Sunday between 4 and 6 o'clock. This show is sponsored by Glass Are Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. 0208 800 6663. This is the Afrocentricity Book Show. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back.
Sweep over my soul. Sweep over my soul. Though the rolling light gets old, Jaja sweep over my soul. Dingy bag, sweep over my soul. Sweep over my soul. Though the billows roll and tempests blow, Jaja will sweep over my soul. Every day sing praise. Ah, yeah, yeah, ah, yeah. Oh, Lord. Sweep over my soul. Sweep over my soul. Though the billows roll and tempest blow, sweep over my soul. I hear a voice is calling from somewhere out there. A voice is singing somewhere in my ear. And I know that I must rise and fill my heart and pray and sing for Jah Almighty. I say stream over my soul. Oh, stream over my soul. The road may rough and tough and go and get so hard. Just sweep over my soul. Yeah, get to me, get to me, oh, get to me. Oh, yeah. And I shall lift my voice to the only one of creation. And I shall sing songs of redemption, songs of praise and the wind. Acclaiming my position in creation as the Son of the Almighty Jah, beholding His glory, manifesting through I and I forever. Oh Lord, sweep over my soul. Sweep over my soul. The billows roll and tempest blow. Just sweep over my soul. Oh, if I had 10,000 voices, I would still be singing a song.
Them never love the black shade. In the bleaching cream, them go bed. Oh, oh, oh. Love get caught within the system. Bleach, love for shave, love no stop trim. Stoop the big house and bling bling. No love themselves, so them bleach them skin. The lightning, see clear the burn, brought up properly. Paint from both folly, in on them lane and them alley. Why bleach out to look like girl, and girl want to look like dolly. Lava splash from hill to the valley. Show the fire up on the bleach again. I want them no bleach and them good beat again. Skin up peel, can't touch the street again. A week I know them gone on the feet again. Are you wine and dash a fire up on the bleach again? I want Tisha Paul and Pete again. Skin up peel, them can't touch the street again. Them get so weak I know them gone on the feet. Them say anything what black never leave. So them start say your brown skin a do it. Now a pharmacy eyesight them all the reach lightning. Them burn up themselves with the bleach. Them same one no said them not take no speech. Some a tell I about them rolling deep. And when them sight the sun them play hide and seek. Flesh get the power by the worm and leech up on a feet. Try to shove fire up on the bleach again. I want them no bleach and them good heat again. Skin up peel, can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Are you wine and dash a fire up on the bleach again? Want them no bleach and them good heat again. Skin up peel, can't touch the street again. Them get so weak I know them gone on the feet. Them set them better than the swine and the drunk crow. Puss and dog get them stoop so low. I listen lassie never teach them to live so. Gone astray themselves they don't know. Them up life get them noggin no thanks for. Full of negligence them no flourish and grow. Look what happen when the elders them bleach out. For the children no eye sample no show the rainbow. Never pitchy patchy like the bleach of them. I want them no bleach and them good heat again. Skin up peel, them can't get this street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Are you wine a dash of fire upon the bleach again? I want them to bleach and them go do it again. School a feel them can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Love get caught within the system. Bleach up a shave, up no stop trim. Stoop the big house and bling bling. No love themselves so them bleach them skin. A lightning, seed clear the burn, brought up properly. They promote falling in them lane and them alley. Why bleach out we look like girl and girl one look like dolly. Love a splash from the hill to the valley. So dash a fire upon the bleach again. I want them to bleach and them go do it again. Skin a peel, them can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. I wine a dash a fire upon the bleach again. I want Keisha Paul even heater them. Skin a peel, them can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Them say anything what black never need. So them start say your brown skin a do it. Now a pharmacy eyesight them all a reach lightning. Them burn up themselves with the bleach. Them same one that said them not take no speech. I tell highway about them rolling deal. When them said this song them play hide and seek. Flash get the bower by the road. One leech up on a freak. Fire upon the bleach again. I want them to bleach and them go do it again. Skin a peel, can't touch the street again. We can know them gone on the feet again. Are you waiting a dash of fire upon the bleach again?
Think you where you come from? As long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind your nationality, you have got the identity of an African. Cause if you come from Clarendon, and if you come from Portland, and if you come from Westmoreland, you're an African. So don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind your nationality, you have got the identity of an African. Cause if you come from Trinidad, and if you come from Nassau, and if you come from Cuba, you're an African. So don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind your complexion, there is no rejection, you're an African. Cause if your flexion high, 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 if your flexion low, low, and if your flexion in between, you're an African. So don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind denomination, that is only segregation, you're an African. Cause if you go to the Catholic, and if you go to the Methodist, and if you go to the Church of God, you're an African. So don't care where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. No mind your nationality,
Yes, greetings, family. Hope you enjoy that music. That was the great Peter Tosh with African. It doesn't matter where you come from, as long as you got that beautiful melanin skin, you're an African. Yeah, don't mind your nationality, don't mind your domination. You are still an African. So, hope you're enjoying the Afrocentricity Book Show every Sunday, 4 till 6 o'clock. We are reading The Irritated Genie, an essay on the Haitian Revolution by Jacob H. Carruthers. This show is sponsored by Glass R Us, 7307 Sisters Road N15. Please go to Glass R Us for all your glazing needs. If you want double glazing, putty glazing, windows, mirrors, balustrade, shower cubicles, you name it, yeah. Please go to Glass R Us for all your glazing needs. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. That is 0208 800 6663. Please don't forget the studio number. Let me get some comments from you. It's 07944 431 366. That's 07944 431 366. So we're reading about the Haitian Revolution. It's important to note that the Haitian Revolution is really suppressed from books. You will not learn about this at school. You rarely see any books written by non-Africans, really, non-black people, okay? So why could they suppress this information? Why? Because, you know, they like to say that Africans are inferior and can't do this and can't do that. But with the Haitian Revolution, we beat them in strategy, we beat them in battle, we beat them in every way possible, really. And also, these smallpox diseases, us living off the land naturally through more vegetable kind of diet, you could say, kept us healthy and strong. But also with our own God, because Dessalines, or I should have said, Dessalines is really the founder, but Dessalines followed in the shoes of Bookman. And Bookman said at the meeting, which led to the starting of the Haitian Revolution, which was also created or organized by Cecile Fatiman, the voodoo priestess, called a Mambo, the priestess, a Mambo. And he said in that speech, a famous Bookman prayer, please Google it, Bookman's prayer. Bookman said, throw away the image of the white man's God. He has always brought down our tears. But listen to the God who speaks in your heart, because our God is a good God, and he sends us to vengeance and justice. So it's a very, very powerful speech which started the Haitian Revolution. Right, so I am now moving on to chapter 7 of the Haitian Revolution, the Irritated Genie book, the Essays on the Haitian Revolution. So chapter 5 is entitled Black versus White. It goes on. The new champion had now risen to direct the Irritated Genie of Haiti. The pale phantom of liberty was a ghost of death in disguise, had been exposed and dethroned. Not since, shortly after the death of Bookman, had the Black Revolution been grounded in the reality of the race war that Europe had been waging against the African people for 2,000 seasons. As Armour's book, put it, the true spirit of revolution was now at the forefront. When the revolution opened or resumed in the fall of 1802, Dessalines, the blackest of the blacks, face to face against Rochambeau, the whitest of the whites. Toussaint and Leclerc were masters of tactful deceit. Both appeared to represent the interests of all parties, regardless of colour. Loyalties were difficult under these circumstances, but Rochambeau, also a French general, who was the son of the French general who fought in the United States War for independence, was himself a colonist. He made no bones about his position: white supremacy and black slavery, mulatto insubordination. As for the existing black population of the island, he advocated the extermination and replacement with fresh, innocent blacks from Africa. Very interesting. In the meantime, a war of terror must be waged against all blacks and mulattoes. Remember, mulattoes is what they call the mixed race people, or we'll call them today. Although I'm sure you know there's only one race, that's the human race. But yeah, let's move on. Because you believe that all of them were kind of docile and and cooperative. That's the mulattoes. So here's how Dessalines appeared to one contemporary French scholar. And his name was Victor Skolscher. He did not wish to borrow anything from the whites. He repelled all civilization. He would not consent to learn anything beyond rudely making some mark which represented the name, his name. He affected to speak only Creole and not to understand French, and although born in Santo Domingo, he vaunted himself as being only a savage African. Okay, so that's a European view of him, yeah, okay? In this section, this is the author speaking here. In this section, I shall quote liberally from Dessalines' own speeches. His eloquence in expressing the philosophy of revolutionary struggle and the rationale for the actions of the Haitian people cannot be equaled by a summary or explanation on the scholar's part. These speeches were made by Dessalines after independence, but surely must reflect the talks he gave his people as they fought the last months of that terrible battle of blood and tears. He was speaking not only to the soldiers properly, but to the women and children, and the old men who were often necessarily with the armies in the camps, as the only safe places for them to live during the bloody campaign of extermination attempted by Rochambeau. And I was reminded, I said last week, you must remember this Haitian revolution, a third of all the troops were women. They were fighting hand in hand, side by side. In that fort I mentioned earlier, Crete at Perot, one of the women was a sniper. Her name was La Martiniere. And she was a sniper on the hill, and she'd walk along the top of the wall, saying to the man, victory or death, you keep on fighting, victory or death. So we're hand in hand with our women, yeah, today, yeah, so I think we need to think about that point there, yeah. Hand in hand, we could win. Indeed, the final phase of the war was fought by all of the people of Haiti, and while the leaders discussed here are male and well known, there were hundreds of thousands of leaders and heroes, many of them women. The one I just spoke about, Marie-Jeanne Lamartiniere, who was the wife of one of Dessalines' top generals, had already formed a valiant role at Crete Perot, and Saint-Belair had joined battle and died courageously with her husband. These thousands of heroes and heroines are recorded in the pages of the more detailed histories of the revolution. See Thomas Madou, History of Haiti, which is in 3 volumes. So Thomas Madou is spelled Madiou. So maybe there's a translation, seems like it might be in French, yeah? The history, it says in French, Histoire de Haiti. But it's probably the history of Haiti, yeah, by Thomas Madou. 3 volumes. So I move on. Black solidarity. The cornerstone of Dessalines' revolutionary philosophy was black solidarity, and a simplification of the concept of the enemy. In other words, blacks were brothers and whites were enemies. Keep it very simple, yeah? Until and unless the fact was incorporated into the consciousness of the blacks and men of colour, the revolution could not be executed with efficiency. The Phantom had defined the enemy as those opposed to liberty and equality. This non-concrete definition confused the target of military action to such an extent that the black troops did not know whom to shoot. I hope you understand that, because if the enemy is people against liberty and equality, who are these people? Is he written on their forehead? But to Dessalines, our enemy are the white people. Just shoot them and you'll be shooting the right one. The best example was the French invasion, when black generals stood petrified as the hordes of white troops, there's about 66,000 of them at least, marched ashore. Had Toussaint said whites are the enemy, the war might have ended might have been much briefer. The coalition of groups organised by Dessalines during the summer and early fall of 1802 consisted of all the historical components of the revolution. The black opportunists, the blacks who fought for liberty and equality, the mulatto integrationists, the free community of blacks, and of course blacks who adhered to the philosophy of Bookman were united. He united them through appeals to their common African ancestry and their common oppressor vis-à-vis the white Frenchman. This was a simple war of black against white. Dessalines later explained, "What we have in common is that bloody-minded people. Their cruelties compared to our moderation, their colour compared to ours, the extension of the seas which separate us, our avenging climate, all plainly tell us that they are not our brethren, and that they will never become such." The union of blacks and mulattoes was also significant. Pétion, who started feeling insecure after the humiliation of their leader Regard, so that was the mulattoes, began to realise that he was not a Frenchman. And Dessalines distrusted him until he discussed Toussaint's misfortune with them. When Dessalines commented that Toussaint had been too partial and lenient towards the whites, Pétion responded, "But how could Toussaint count upon the sincerity of the whites? He, their former slave, when I have not even the friendship of my own father," because obviously his father's white, "of my own father, for the simple reason that I have African blood in my veins." It's very interesting. So again, Pétion, a mulatto, a mixed race person, says, "But how could General Toussaint count upon the sincerity of the whites when he was a former slave, when I have not even the friendship of my own father, for the simple reason that I have African blood in my veins?" And that's why I say we can learn so much from the Haitian Revolution. So let me move on. After this, Dessalines accepted mulattoes as their brothers. He later proclaimed, "I have seen two classes of men born to cherish, assist, and succor one another, mixed in a world and blended together, crying for vengeance and disputing the honour of the first blow." He continued, "Blacks and yellows," obviously mulattoes probably, "blacks and yellows, whom the refined duplicity of Europe for a long time endeavoured to divide. You, who are now consolidated and make one family, without doubt, it was necessary for our perfect reconciliation should be sealed with the blood of your butchers." So they're sealing their unity with the blood of the enemy that they're fighting. From the base of black unity, Dessalines put together the Army of National Independence. The high command of the army under Dessalines consisted of 8 black generals, including himself and Christophe, his second in command, and 10 mulattoes. His personal secretary was a man of colour. Dessalines was thus removed the colour distinctions between people of African descent, basically saying we're all Africans. Another act designed to end the crisis of natural unity or natural identity was his removal of the white bar from the red, white and blue tricolour, under which Toussaint's army and the French expedition had been fighting. Blacks marching to the tune of the La Marseillaise and French songs under the French flag proclaiming liberty, equality and fraternity was a spectacle to behold. It was quite confusing when the enemy was doing the same thing. Both sides were trying to save the French Republic. Dessalines removed the white bar, symbolising both white people and the French nation in particular. He then joined the blue, which symbolized the blacks, and the red, which symbolized the mulattoes. Thus, the United Sons of Africa were fighting against their common enemy. This is a quote: "Let us swear to the whole world, to ourselves, to renounce France forever and to die rather than live under its dominion, to fight to the last breath for the independence of our country." Ashe. So what he did, he took the French flag, the tricolour, and ripped out the white of it, and he joined the red with the blue and said, "This is our flag now." So the flag you see today is not the correct flag what Dessalines put together. They've carried out a lot of tricks since the independence and said they've got control, really, of the land. So this next heading is called Independence or Death, and we are split in chapter 7. Remember, this is Afrocentricity Book Show. We are reading The Irritated Genie, an essay on the Haitian Revolution by Jacob H. Carruthers. With these words, Dessalines stated in bold terms a second component of the revolutionary philosophy: independence or death. The Declaration of Independence summed up the position in these words: "The independence of Santo Domingo is proclaimed. Restored to our primitive dignity, we have asserted our rights. We swear never to yield them to any power on earth. The God who protects us, the God of the free man, bids us to stretch out towards them our conquering arms." The statement is reminiscent of Bookman, who had formulated the policy of independence 13 years earlier. Without explicitly using the word, his formula was conquer or die. This philosophy recognized that a people cannot entrust its liberty to another people. People must not conquer. People must not only conquer for the liberation, but must maintain it. As Dessalines later put it, "You will be the guardians of our liberty, of the liberty you cherish." He continued, "Swear then to live free and independent, and prefer death to everything that would lead to replace you under the yoke. Swear then to pursue to everlasting the traitors and enemies of your independence." What Dessalines emphasized is that the people cannot depend even on their leaders to give and maintain their liberty. They themselves must be committed to it. He reminded them, "It is upon your constancy and courage I depend. When I first entered the career of liberty to fight despotism." The concrete expression of independence is contained in Dessalines' oath. "Never again shall a colonist or a European set foot upon this territory with the title of master or proprietor. This revolution must henceforth form the fundamental basis of our Constitution." I'll read that again. This is what he said on the Independence Day, 1st of January 1804. He said, "Never again shall a colonist or a European set foot upon this territory with the title of master or proprietor. This revolution shall henceforth form the fundamental basis of our Constitution." Never before nor since has black independence been so clearly defined. So the next heading is Total War. Dessalines' philosophy of how to wage a revolutionary war is summarized in a post-independence reflection. It says, "I abandoned to them," as the European enemy, "freely the shores and the places where cities have existed. But woe to those who may approach too near to the mountains. It were better for them that the sea receive them unto its profound abyss, rather than to be devoured by the anger of the children of Haiti." In other words, Dessalines' strategy was to order total destruction of the cities and then have the blacks moved into the hills like the ancient free communities of blacks. There they would establish camps, plant crops, and live as militant communities destroying all enemies who ventured into the country. The final phase would be isolation of the enemy in a few coastal enclaves, and where they would be forced to evacuate or die. This is exactly the battle plan that Dessalines followed from the fall of 1802 to the fall of 1803, when the French unconditionally surrendered. This, of course, meant sacrifice. The cities were places of luxury and seats of the good life for many. So in burning them to the ground, many of the more prosperous blacks had to sacrifice their homes, their lives, their lifestyles. But total war meant total sacrifice. As Dessalines said of his own sacrifice, "I have sacrificed everything to fly to your defense, parents, children, fortune, and am now only rich in your liberty." Dessalines even sacrificed his reputation. Not only his reputation, but his attitude was, "Of what consequence to me is the opinion which contemporary and future generations will pronounce upon my conduct. I have performed my duty." If I repeat again, "Of what consequence to me is the opinion which contemporary or future generations will pronounce upon my conduct. I have performed my duty." In this regard, Dessalines viewed his role as leader as one which must embody the revolutionary principles to a fault. My happier destiny reserves me to be one day the sentinel who is the guard, the idol to which we now sacrifice to. I have grown old, fighting for you, sometimes almost alone. The ultimate aspect of this concept of total war was in the ability of blacks to wage war with the same level of intensity that the enemy was waging it. It was not enough to demonstrate military superiority and gentlemanly conduct, as Toussaint always did. A war of terror against the oppressor must be waged. Rochambeau arbitrarily murdered and tortured blacks and mulattoes throughout his tenure. Dessalines returned tit for tat. One morning after Rochambeau had brutally, savagely butchered 500 black prisoners of war, in frustration at over losing a battle, Dessalines hung 500 French officers in plain sight of the French army. When Rochambeau imported man-eating dogs to help exterminate the blacks, Dessalines pledged that he would make the French eat the dogs, and indeed Dessalines besieged the city where the dogs are kept, and soon the French army ran out of food and were forced to eat the dogs. Rochambeau had proclaimed that when he caught Dessalines, he would not hang him or shoot him as a man, but he would whip him to death as a slave. In the end, however, it was Rochambeau who trembled like a coward. He begged the English Navy to take him a prisoner of war rather than leave him to face the wrath of the conquering Dessalines. Thus, as Dessalines promised at Crête-à-Perot, he had rendered his people independent. 40,000 French soldiers, the cream of the elite corps of Napoleon, had died in a vain attempt to reassert white supremacy. The next heading is race vindication. On August the 14th, 1791, Bookman had exhorted the blacks to vengeance. The philosophy which Dessalines established returned into that divine mandate. Let us look more closely at the vengeance as the motive force of the Haitian Revolution. There are those who argue that race vengeance was nothing more than a primitive and conditional response to the white racism of the French. But this fury was black racism and no more justified than was white racism. In view of the importance of race vengeance in the spirit of the Haitian Revolution, some points need stressing to refute this charge of black racism. In the first place, the national elites of the French, like all Europeans, was white supremacy in every dimension of biological and social life. And as you know, this is true today. This was the core of white racism, and Rochambeau was an avowed, unapologetic exponent of that position. On the contrary, neither Bookman nor Dessalines ever advocated black supremacy for the attainment of black liberation. As lovers of their own people, Bookman and Dessalines were courageous enough to grasp reality and embrace a course of action that was both necessary and sufficient for black liberation. The spirit of vengeance was necessary to obtain liberty. Revenge in this sense combined the rational decision to destroy oppression by any means necessary with the effective commitment that mobilizes the courage and concentration with which to carry the program through. Revenge, finally, was the natural way to correct the wrong that the blacks had so long suffered, remember, over 300 years, and ought not be denied an oppressed group of struggling for their liberation. It defined reality in concrete terms. No longer were the people fighting for abstractions such as liberty, equality, and fraternity, or like the fighting against the system heard so frequently today. As you know, people say we fight the system, but what is the system? They were fighting to avenge their wrongs. Dessalines, in his post-independence speeches, hammered this wisdom to the people. You must become like your natural enemies, cruel and merciless. A people so inspired are brought up in adversity, and whose haughty daring frowns at obstacles and increases by dangers. Dessalines challenged the people to cast round your eyes on every part of the land. Seek there your wives, your husbands, your brothers, your sisters. What did I say? Seek your children at the breast. What has become of them? I shudder to tell it, the prey of the vultures. Instead, these victims, the affrighted eye sees only their assassins. Tigers still covered with their blood, and whose terrifying presence reproaches you for their insensibility and your guilty tardiness to avenge them. Dessalines also taught the people, you have done nothing if you do not give the nations a terrible, though just example of vengeance that ought to be exercised by a people proud of its liberty and zealous of maintaining it. Let us begin with the French. Let them shudder at approach of our shores. If not on account of the cruelties they have committed, at least by the terrible resolution we are going to make to devote to death whosoever native of France should soil with his sacrilegious footsteps this territory of liberty. There's some deep words by Dessalines there. He's saying enemy will never come on our land again. The end of this fury of race vengeance is for the purpose rather than for the bloodlust, because it is necessary to deprive an inhuman government to which has hitherto held our minds in a state of the most humiliating torpitude, of every home of being enabled against again to enslave us. Dessalines hoped that the Haitian people would collectively reflect his reputation. My name has become a horror to all friends of slavery, and despots and tyrants only pronounce it, cursing the day they gave me birth. He also asserted that he had not avenged America, he had avenged America, referring to all the victims of white racism in the diaspora. Much of Dessalines' preaching in this regard must have been directed at those who were somewhat skeptical about him, about acceptance of the genie. After the revolution, he commended the people who had won their independence. Your vengeful fury has swept away every obstacle to its impetuous course. This spirit of Dessalines was the backbone of the revolution. Indeed, the emotion of vengeance seemed not only mandated by God, but also to be in accord with the fury of nature. Let us now cite in full Dessalines' dissertation or description of the spirit of the revolution. So let me remind you, this is the Afrocentricity Book Show. We are reading The Irritated Genie, an essay on the Haitian Revolution, written by Jacob H. Carruthers. We are in Chapter 7. We must remember this show is sponsored by Glass R Us, 7307 Sisters Road. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. So let me move on to Dessalines' words. Yeah, but it's almost at the end of the chapter, actually. And I've lost my page, so bear with me one moment. Right, so indeed, the emotion of vengeance seemed not only to be mandated by God, but also to those, also to be in accord with the fury of nature. So let us cite the full Dessalines' description of the spirit of the revolution. He said, already at its approach, the European invasion force, the irritated genie of Haiti, looming out in the bosom of the sea, appears. Its menacing face rouses the waves and stirs up storms, and its mighty hand smashes or scatters their ships. To this formidable voice, the laws of nature pay obedience. Disease, plague, famine, conflagration, poison are his constant attendants. Actually, this was a personification of the sea, climate, and elements engulfing the defined island. It is, however, an appropriate dramatization of the spirit of the people. Dessalines continued, but why calculate on the assistance of the climate and of the elements? Have I forgot that I command a people of no common caste, brought up in adversity, whose haughty daring frowns at the obstacle and increases by dangers? Let them come from these homicidal cohorts. It were better for them that the sea receive them into their profound abyss, rather than to be devoured by the anger of the children of Haiti. If anything, then, the Haitian people were more furious than the irritated genie of the sea surrounding the island. Finally, the collective emotion of vengeance might inspire other oppressed people to rise up and throw off their chains. This was the hope that Dessalines announced to the people of Martinique, and an implicit inspiration for all other black slaves. Here is the account of the spirit of the revolution under Dessalines' leadership, given by a participant, Devasti, a soldier in the revolution who was a loyal follower of Christophe, and a critique of Dessalines. This was written in 1819. In short, after having experienced every vicissitude of fortunes, and being bowed down beneath the harshest affliction, after having been for 12 years the sport and victims of all the factions which succeeded each other in Santo Domingo, after having shed our blood in 1,000 battles without conferring any real benefit to our country, we now, for the first time, fought for our own interests. We were no longer the mere instruments of our own destruction for a cause which was foreign to us. For the first time, we maintained a national war. We fought for liberty, for independence, for our country, for ourselves, to rescue ourselves from death and the tyranny of our executioners. On the one side were the French, the indigenes, and on the other, hatred and vengeance, inflamed that our courage, patriotism, and liberty guided our steps. We had both our own individual injuries and the death of our martyred brethren to avenge. We rushed to combat with shouts of frontier joy. We fought man for man, each panting to slay his opponent, each burning to shed his blood in defense of his country, his freedom and his independence, happy to be able to shed it to the last drop in so good a cause. After a dreadful and bloody struggle, the victims of oppression were left the sole and undisputed masters of the field. So race vengeance is thus the rational, emotional spirit that is necessary for true liberation and independence. This is why Dessalines succeeded where Toussaint failed. On November the 29th, 1803, the remnants of the French army, like a beaten dog with its tail tucked between his legs, scampered out of Cap Francois, leaving their wounded and all the settlers that they had come to vindicate. Such is the record of the irritated genie of Haiti. That's quite deep there. Okay, good. So they shed so much blood and fought so many battles. And why? For independence. But not only just independence, for vengeance, for the 300 years of the most wickedest behavior. I think I said last week that even the planters, they were just crazy. What it does, they speak about, when we speak about enslavement, we normally speak about the victim. The victim, he's beaten down, he's nothing, he's low his self-esteem, stuff like that. But what we never speak about, number one, the enslaved who rise up and what's happened to their minds, that they free themselves. But what we never speak about as well is what it does to the enslaver. What does it do to the enslaver? What does racism do to the racists? What does it do to them? It gives them a mental disorder. Racism, I'm sure you know, is a mental disorder. Even the American Psychological Association said that racism is a mental disorder. So there's about at least 5 different parts we can see of this mental disorder. And they've got it here, where we live today. Okay. So what's that mental disorder? Number one, denial of reality. People who we class as kind of colloquially mad deny reality. They can't deal with reality. They can't deal with the real world. So racism, black inferiority, that's not real. It's created. So that's why they deny reality. They cannot face up to the truth. They could not believe that Dessalines or Toussaint could outwit them, outfight them, out-strategize them. They did not deal with reality. Okay. Number two, perceptual distortion. When they look at reality, when they look at the world, everything that they perceive is distorted. Remember, there's a difference between what you see and what you perceive. Are you happy with that? There's a different what you see, because you may see 2 boys walking down the road, and you look at them, and what you perceive is 2 young, fighting, fit, beautiful black brothers. Yeah, Europeans see or Europeans, let's say the police, for example, they'll perceive two black boys walk down the road as what? A danger, a threat, as criminals. So your perception of the same thing, or what you see, you may see the same things, but we perceive it in a different way, would be the best way to put it. Perceptual distortion. What they perceive is distorted by what they've got in their mind, which is that mental illness. Delusions of grandeur. They think that they're superior. All other people are inferior. This is rubbish. There's nothing superior about them. If somebody's superior, it'll be self-evident. However, they use racism to make themselves feel that they are superior. So they have delusions of grandeur. Also, phobia in the face of difference. When they see people of colour, what do they want to do? What does history tell us to do? What does history tell us about this? History tells us that when they see people of colour, they want to exterminate them. What did they do in Australia? What did they do in the USA? What did they do out through the Caribbean? You tell me. I'm not making this stuff up. This is just factual stuff. They exterminated these people. Tasmania. Where are the Tasmanians? I saw a rugby match one time. Oh, no, there's Tasmanians. Tasmanians ran out and there was all these white guys. So white guys are Tasmanians? New Zealand. Where are the original New Zealanders? Hawaii. Do you know the people of Hawaii with black people? Where are they? So they have phobia in the face of difference. When they say these people, they want to exterminate them. Don't believe me, just read history, you'll know this. And another sickness, part of this sickness, is projecting blame. What do I mean by that? They'll blame somebody else for what they're doing. So, for example, slavery. They'll say that, well, black people sold each other into slavery, nothing to do with us. Projecting blame. But remember, there was no slave trade. I was sending some messages there on social media earlier today. In 1441, this Spanish ruler called Henry the Navigator, I don't know why they call him a navigator, he never actually went on a ship, but he used to collect all the maps from the Moors. And he sent out two of his guys to go enslave Africans from Spain. That was 1444. 1562, some 121 years later, John Hawkins, the first British slaver, and his cousin, Sir Walter Raleigh, went to West Africa, and they did the same thing, slave raiding. There was no slave trade, because they hadn't set the slave trade up yet. So in 1414, they built up ships and guns, raided the beach, kidnapped people, took them away. John Hawkins and his cousin, Sir Walter Raleigh, that's what they did, in his own words. He said, we drove along the island, burning and spoiling. You can work out what that means. And we seized about 300. We found these Africans, he said, very gentle, and we seized them. So he kidnapped them, slave raiding they call this, and took them away and sold them in the Caribbean. 121 years later. So if there's a slave trade, why are they running to the beach and seizing people? There's no slave trade because Europeans hadn't set it up yet. But what they like to do is project blame. What is in effect the victors blaming the victims of their own victimization. So racism is a mental illness, and the 5 areas of this mental illness are denial of reality, perceptual distortion. They look at the world and they can't see it correctly. Delusion of grandeur, they think they're superior. Phobias in the face of difference. When they say difference, they see fear there. They want to fight. And also projecting blame. We didn't do anything wrong, so when our children are expelled from school, even from the age of 5 years old, all it's nothing to do with us, they did it. Or our children get low marks. Well, there's them because they're inferior, low marks. But as you know, this study's been done. Studies been done when they will what they call blind marking. Your child, for example, their stuff is marked to school, and the teacher will mark them down. However, when they send away their exams, for example, or their coursework to somewhere else where the people marking it don't know what their colour are, amazingly, they get higher marks. So how is that? How is when the marks are sent away when people don't know who these children are, they get higher marks, but when their own teachers mark it, they mark them down? It's because of perceptual distortion, denial of reality. This is what racism does to their mind. We love to speak about what it's done to us, but we never speak about what it has done to the creators of this racism. Because the only way they can really abuse people, what they did, and lynch and burn and put, as I said in Haiti, put dynamite in people and blow them to pieces, take African women and throw them in the oven to burn them to death because maybe they didn't make a cake correctly. Is there a serious mental illness that they've got, yeah? They've got to adapt to doing this stuff there. And the only way to adapt to do this, really, is to develop this mental disorder for them to kind of live with themselves. Okay, so it's 6 o'clock now. This is the end of the show, people. I hope you enjoyed that. Next week, I'm going to start on Chapter 8 of The Irritated Genie by Jacob Carruthers. This is the Afrocentricity Book Show. Hope you enjoyed today. Make sure you tune in next week. Let your family or friends know. Every 4 to 6 o'clock on a Sunday, the Afrocentricity Book Show. We're going to be tuning out now. I hope you enjoyed the show. So I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Be good, be careful, love your family. We need to unite. We need to do what's right, yeah? Okay. So once you know what your identity is, you'll know what your interests are. And once you know what your interests are, it should shape your intentions. So please always remember the 3 I's. One reason we read history is that we know what our identity is. When we read the history given to us, it's a fake history. So when we know our own history, it will give us group consciousness. We know that we all are one and that we need to unite and we need to do what's right for ourselves. Okay? So have a great week, people. Stay strong. I'll see you next week. This is Brother Jegna on the Afrocentricity Book Show. I love you all. You take care. Until next week. Yeah? One love.
Wake up, people, wake up, wake up. Wake up, people, wake up now. Wake up. Wake up, people, wake up, wake up. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. Listen, Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up, people. Wake up now. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up, people. Wake up now. Wake up. Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Look around and then I see a little old man and a homeless lady. They don't have no food to eat. Father, give them a warm place to sleep. Come on, wake up the people. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up, people. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up, people. Wake up now. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up. Wake up, people, wake up now. Storms will come and the storms will go. The earth may quake and still the souls of the ones we love. And some will die, some shall but die. They're in heaven, so dry your eyes. Celebrate life, don't you cry. Jump for joy, like a baby with a toy. Wake up, people, wake up. Wake up, people, wake up now. Wake up, people, wake up. Dry your eyes. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up now. Don't you cry. Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. Wake up now. Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord. Wake up now. Wake up.
The storms will come and the storms will go. The earth may quake, and still the souls of the ones we love. Yes, some will die. Yes, some will die. But they're in heaven. So dry your eyes. Dry your eyes. Dry your eyes. Don't you cry. Dry your eyes. Wake up. It's gonna be alright. Dance in the streets.
It's gonna be alright.
Dance wherever.
It's gonna be alright.
You may be.
It's gonna be okay. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. I know. Wake up, wake up, wake up. I know. Wake up, wake up. Well, yes, I know. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. Good God Almighty. It's gonna be alright. Put your hands in the air. Wave them like you just don't get. Oh, Lord, Lord. Father God, in your name I pray. Help my people. Help my people. Help my people, Lord. Help my people, Lord. Oh, no, no. I know. It hurts sometimes. Yes, I know. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. We're gonna jump for joy. We're gonna be alright. A little shout.
Yeah, a little shout. Y'all know how y'all do in church, right? You just shout. Jump for joy. Put your hands in the air, just like that. Put your hands up in the air like that. I feel alright. You like that? I like that too. Let us wave. Woo. Just wave. Now turn around to your neighbor. That's right. Turn around. Look him in the eye. Say it's gonna be alright.
It's gonna be alright.
It's gonna be alright. Y'all say
It's gonna be alright.
it's gonna be alright. A little louder. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. That's alright, Josh. It's gonna be alright. Now I'm gonna do one more time. One more time. You ready? Let me hear you just like this. Say it right.
Wake up. Wake up.
What?
Wake up now. Wake up now.
Y'all sing it.
Wake up. Wake up now. Wake up. Wake up now.
One more time.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up now. Wake up now.
All right, let's go, y'all. My father would love this. See me sing a church song, a spiritual song. You know what I normally do. Yeah, I'm a preacher's son. You know, when you rock with Josh Milan, it's just gonna happen. Hallelujah.
Good God Almighty. I feel it in my hands, feel it in my feet, feel it in my soul, all over me. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. Yeah, I know what you're going through. I know where you've been. It hurts sometimes. Lord knows. Keep your head up.
Keep your head up to the sky. Dry your eyes. Dry your eyes. It's alright. It's okay. Remember, the sun will shine in the morning. God bless.